Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Speaker, I'm really pleased to support the Wildlife Powers Amendment Bill, and I want to acknowledge the member who's just resumed his seat and thank him for the considerate way in which he chaired the committee considering this bill. I also want to acknowledge the outgoing Prime Minister, the Right Honourable John Key, and say that even though we obviously have serious political differences, he has led our country with dignity, and I wish him and his family the very best in his retirement or into whatever role he transitions from here. I know that any of us in this House lose a lot of family time, and none so as much as the Prime Minister, so I hope that he's able to catch up with some of that time with his family. We've got a lot of big issues facing our country. We know that we have a serious funding shortfall in health. We know that we've got the same in education. We know that our police are feeling really stretched. I hope that the incoming Prime Minister is able to get her or his head around those issues and prize some money out of the Minister of Finance so that we can start properly supporting the people who do so much amazing public service for our country. The member Scott Simpson quite rightly acknowledged the amazing contribution that the staff of the Department of Conservation make in so many areas, and I'd certainly add my voice to that acknowledgement and thanks. They are significantly under-resourced for the work that they are already empowered to do by legislation, required to do actually by legislation. The amount of land that they're able to oversee as our guardians and supervisors has diminished significantly over the last 5 years because in many areas you just can't do more with less, and that's what the government has continued to ask of every government department and agency. So while supporting this legislation because it's sensible to update legislation that is well over 60 years old and look at what current powers should be given to public servants or honorary rangers, as we've debated in relation to the fish and game rangers. This bill does, and none of the contribution from the Minister or the Associate Minister have given any commitment at all to adding additional resources to the Department of Conservation, which would marry up with the additional work that we're requiring them to do. So this bill gives them additional powers. That means they'll have more work to do. They should get funded for it. They can't continue to do more with less, and that's a very strong concern that I have in relation to this legislation. So the new powers that the DOC rangers are getting is the power to seize a wider range of evidence. That's clearly needed. Smarter applications are being made in order to commit crimes in the conservation area, and we should empower those who we've given the guardianship of those responsibilities to the legal power to use every tool available. The rangers will now have the power to stop a person. They currently don't have that. They're able to stop vehicles, they're able to stop vessels, and they're able to take bags, but they're not actually able to stop people. So that's an addition that I think is sensible. They're allowed to stop those people for the time that it would take to do an investigation. So, obviously we have entrusted our public service to not take advantage of the powers that we're giving them. We know they don't want to detain people for no good reason, but it is specified in the legislation that it's to allow investigation of suspected crimes. We're enabling the rangers to seize items such as laptops, mobile phones and cameras. When the original legislation was passed in 1953, we didn't have laptops and mobile phones. Now we just laugh at the thought of being without them. We did have cameras, but not the modern sort that we have now, including on mobile phones. So we're giving them power to seize things that they actually need to seize that weren't envisaged because they weren't even made at the time of the original legislation. We require suspected offenders to provide identification details, and that's where Labour and other parties, New Zealand First and Greens, I think, differ with the National Party. It was a very sensible amendment that David Parker proposed during the committee stages, and I regret that, I think just because it was from an opposition member that the government declined it, and that's stupid politics, actually. I'm always of the view that regardless of what party people are from, you should be able to look at the proposal they're making and determine on a basis of fact whether it's a good idea or not. Currently, to enable a successful prosecution under this legislation, a person's date of birth must be provided, otherwise the case cannot be successful. We give all the other powers to the Fish and Game honorary rangers, but we don't provide them with the one power that was proposed in the SOP, and that is the power to require somebody to provide the honorary ranger with their date of birth. So prosecutions under this legislation will fail because that critical bit of information is not required to be provided. So if a person just says, no, I'm not going to provide it to the honorary ranger, they've got no backing of the law to ensure that that person complies with what they would have to comply with if it was a dock ranger, and therefore the prosecution would be successful. I think it was a foolish decline of the proposal. I actually think the Select Committee should have picked up that error and amended it at that stage. They didn't do that, so a slight failing in the Select Committee process then. They declined to take up that opportunity during the committee stages, so the third reading, for all the support it's going to get, is not giving our Parliament as good a bill as it should. Mr. Speaker, I just want to comment on the earlier contribution that I made in relation to the stress that dock workers are under. We know that dock employees do amazing work for our country. We know that they are working in partnership with many corporations, many other government departments and agencies, and thousands of volunteers throughout the country. Everywhere we look around New Zealand, we see groups of people who just care about their local area and their community and do good things, often under the leadership of dock workers. Dock would not be able to survive and do the work it does without that partnership with volunteers. So as well as commending the dock staff, I also want to commend the organisations that sponsor them. They get good kudos out of it, but so they should actually. They're putting good money into the department where the government has refused to do it. And of course also the volunteers who do so much, not just in this area, but in many other areas as well. I know that many academics and people outside the political process have raised concerns about the additional stress on the Department of Conservation and the lack of funding. In 2009, we had 803 dock rangers in New Zealand. Today, there are only 637. That is a significant reduction in the amount of frontline conservation staff that we are expecting to do this work. In 2009, the dock budget was cut by $46 million. That's a huge cut in a baseline which was already pretty marginal, actually. They got by, but we require them to do so much under statute, and then the National Party cuts their budget. Each year, each successive years, there have been cuts to the budget. There was significant restructuring of the department, which proved to be a major disaster, actually. A lot of centralisation of the activities of the Department of Conservation, which actually, while it gains some efficiencies, it undermines the partnership that Department of Conservation staff must have with local communities in order to generate that trust and shared vision which provides us with the volunteers that I mentioned earlier. So dock staff deserve to be better recognised by this Parliament, but that recognition needs to be backed up by the funds that they need to do the job. So here we are in the third reading, giving the dock rangers the additional powers they need to do their job well, and I just call on the Minister, whoever the Minister of Conservation is next week, will probably be a new Minister, to call on whoever is the Finance Minister, and who knows if it's going to be a new Finance Minister or not. It's quite hard to pick at the moment, but I call on both of those ministers to back this legislation up with funding so that dock staff can do their work properly resourced.